evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining the North Miami Public Library for the North Miami Memory Project, a historical exhibit and program series presented in partnership with Florida International University Libraries, the Florida Humanities Council, the Greater North Miami Historical Society, and of course, the Friends of the North Miami Public Library. As we, the members of this beautifully diverse community, stroll down North Miami's memory lane together and pay homage to our past and learn how to prepare for a promising future. At this time, I would like to invite our North Miami elected officials here to the podium. Councilman Scott Galvin, he's our District 1 councilman, along with Councilwoman Carol Keys, Esquire of District 2. Please.
They're going to make the guy who has no voice say the first words. But this is the reason we started the North Miami Historical Society 22 years ago. A few stalwart North Miamians had the vision to create a body that would preserve the photos, preserve the ephemera, and preserve those memories that created North Miami.
Thank you. Welcome. And I want to thank the Historical Society and Seth for being here tonight. Thank you, Scott, because he's been so instrumental in our Historical Society. It means so much to me because I've lived here my whole life. Picture of my house from 1957 that's still there, the library in 53, which I was going to. So this is just incredible. All this is me. All of this is a lot of you, and if it's not, then you get to know what we're really about.
Thank you, Councilwoman Keys and Councilman Galvin. At this time, I would like to move forward with welcoming remarks from Bonnie Rothschild. She's our North Miami Public Library Assistant Director. Let's give her a warm round of applause as she comes to the podium.
I bring you greetings from our library director, Lucia Gonzalez, who really regrets very much that she couldn't be here tonight to see the grand opening that brings really a closure to a long process of developing this experience that we're all having tonight. The process actually began in 2015, right after the library reopened from a renovation, with the StoryCorps Memory Project, which was headed by our own librarian, Audrey Ryan. This is about the past and the present and the future. Each of them is important. We need them all as part of our lives, and this really brings to life the history of North Miami and helps us nurture the future generations when they know where they are and where they've come from.
Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I am so super excited to see you. This has been my first project to do for the public library, and it is a success, I think. So this is great. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here. None of this would be possible without what Lucia had done and in getting the funding from all the different organizations where she did. It is her vision to have our history here. It allows us to start a conversation. Brian Cooper of FIU, the North Campus Library, had commented that the pictures are so interesting because of not only what they show, but what they don't show. Thank you.
Seth Bramson has been a resident of Greater Miami for more than 71 years, and he's a senior collector of Florida East Coast Railroad, Florida Transportation Memorabilia, Miami Memorabilia, and Floridiana in America, having begun collecting, as he likes to say, all this junk 61 years ago in May. The founder and current president of the Miami Memorabilia Collectors Club, his collections of Miami Memorabilia and Floridiana are the largest in private hands in the country. A graduate of Cornell University's famed School of Hotel Administration, he holds a master's degree from St. Thomas University and Florida International University, both here in nearby Miami. In 2008, he was honored by FIU when he was presented with the Torch Award. That's the university's highest alumni honor. In February 2017, he was again honored at a special ceremony and presentation at the home of the university president, Mark Rosenberg. He's an adjunct professor of history at Barry University, where he is a historian in residence, as well as an adjunct professor of history at Nova Southeastern University's Lifelong Learning Institute. He's also a historian in residence and adjunct professor of history at FIU's Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. The author of 33 books on South Florida local and Florida transportation history, he is America's single most published Florida history book author. So let's give our speaker, Seth Bramson, a warm North Miami round of applause as he comes.
You know, before we get started, I have some people that I have to introduce to you. You've already met our two wonderful council people who are absolutely the greatest. But we have several other people that I want you to meet. The young fella sitting over here in the suit is our former mayor, John Stembridge. And we're just delighted that John is with us. And the other young fella who's sitting on the other side of the table, let me tell you, what a pedigree this man has. His dad, for many years, before the state legislature decided that it was only going to be county judges, was the Bay Harbor Islands judge, later mayor for many years, councilman. His one sister is a rabbi and cantor here in Miami. His other sister is a great songwriter. His dear mother, a teacher of music. And of course, his aunt, the great Judy Drucker, teaching at Beach High for 30 years, our friend, Jonathan Nelson. And just a couple of, when I do these talks, I really would love to introduce everybody. We just can't. But I do want you to meet two more wonderful people. I know that many of you listen to WLRN Radio, National Public Radio, 91.3 on your FM dial. And there's one show that to me is the greatest of all. It is the longest running radio program on the same station in the history of Florida, 42 and a half years. Every Sunday night I want you to listen now, every Sunday night, you don't have to stay up till midnight, but I want you to turn it on at 8 o'clock. Because every Sunday night, our kind of music, Broadway show music, jazz, just wonderful. And that show, ladies and gentlemen, is Night Train with Ted Grossman, my friend, Ted Grossman. And one final introduction before we get started, because we really have a very special guest tonight. And he is the subject of a biography, which is 240 pages and is titled From Brooklyn to the Battle of the Bulge and on to Building an International Business, World War II, Battle of the Bulge, German POW, Stalag 4B survivor, winner of the Bronze Star for bravery, 2 Purple Hearts, wounded twice at the Battle of the Bulge, and the Combat Infantry Medal, which is about this far below the Silver Star. When he was captured by the Germans, 106th Division, the Golden Lion, he was 150 pounds, and when he was liberated by the Russians on May 1st of 45, he was 100 pounds. When the Brigadier General presented him with the Bronze Star, he said to him, and I quote, "Barney, if you'd only saved a couple of more lives, I could have given you the Silver Star." How many lives? He only saved 7 documented lives. Ladies and gentlemen, our friend Barney Merson. We are here tonight to talk to you about the Boulevard of Dreams. And when I spoke to Brian Cooper, wonderful Brian Cooper at FIU, and we're going to give another talk in September. We're going to hone in more on, of course, Interama. But so that you understand how it all began, and I want you to realize and recognize that it really began and once in a while, I don't do this very often, but once in a while I got to look at a piece of paper. It really began in 1858, because in 1858, a couple of fellows by the name of George Lewis and Robert Fletcher moved up from the Miami River. Remember that there was Kunti being grown, the starch, around the Miami River. No, the Brickles were not here yet. Julia Tuttle was not here yet. And maybe someday you'll get to hear my talk on debunking the Greater Miami myths. And that's when we debunk the nonsense. Julia Tuttle did not send Mr. Flagler any orange blossoms, and we learn about that at that time. But at any rate, they moved up to this area. Later on, of course, a great man by the name of William Gleason would move to a place called Biscayne. Now, what occurred thereafter, though, is that a couple of fellows, and you know, one of the things that I do, as some of you know who have been to my talks, and when I give my talks, everything is documented. I don't give walking tours or boat trips and bring in the group and say, that was Al Capone's hideaway. Al Capone didn't have any hideaways. He had a house on Palm Island, Miami Beach. So if I tell you something, as the great expression goes, you can take it to the bank. And you see where we are sitting right now, starting at the Little River Canal and going all the way north, somewhere up into the middle of what is today called North Miami. And when I showed this to Kathy Moore, whose family was the original T.V. and T.Y. Moore Pineapple Company, she went out of her mind, because this is the only known to exist. Now notice the disclaimer words, known to exist. It's the only known to exist letterhead from the T.V. and T.Y. Moore Farms Company, Miami, Florida. And after the talk, you'll be welcome to come up and take a look at it, all right? So what happens? They own all the land. And eventually, and the reason that the Boulevard of Dreams is so important is because everything is tied together. It's not as if each municipality, even though today, separate independent municipalities, but everything came out of that one huge tract. And so what occurred was that eventually, and this is, remember, following the various Indian tribes, the Timucuan, the Tequesta, the Calusa, the Seminole. And remember that when the Miami Circle was discovered, and of course, Miami's walking fountain of misinformation, no names please, we're British, comes in and says, oh, this was the center of Tequesta. No, it wasn't. The center of Tequesta life was in the place where the Spanish, the first attempt at settlement in the New World, ladies and gentlemen, the first attempt, not the first successful, the first attempt, as we like to say, just down the road a piece, at a place today called El Portal, documented by the Smithsonian Institution. And in 1535, the Spanish came ashore at what is today El Portal. And I know that many of you have been down there to see the mound. That is where the center of Tequesta life was, ladies and gentlemen, not at the Miami River. Now, 20 years after the 1535 attempt, the Spanish again tried to settle, that time at the Miami River. Again, totally unsuccessful. 10 years later, of course, 1565, where do they go? St. Augustine. And so, well ahead of Jamestown, well ahead of Plymouth Rock, the oldest city in America, and it is. But what happened here? Well, what happened here was that, remember, that in the very early years, in 1903, a fellow by the name of Arthur Griffin, we know that name, came down and he bought a tract of land. And that tract of land he would eventually name Griffin's Biscayne Park Estates. Notice the full name. Unlike what Mr. Merrick did, unlike what Merle Tebbets did in North Miami Beach, unlike what Harvey Baker Graves did in Sunny Isles, he had a different gig. If you came and you bought a piece of property, you got a strawberry shortcake. So that was his bit. People loved it because he had a green thumb. He was terrific. Now the only thing was that Griffin, remember that in December of 31, the residents of Griffin's Biscayne Park Estates voted to incorporate. Only they did not care for Mr. Griffin. And so Griffin's Biscayne Park Estates became the village of Biscayne Park. And one of the things that the people didn't love was that if you look in our Boulevard of Dreams, in the chapter regarding Biscayne Park, there's a piece of Griffin stationery. And one of the selling points was the statement that all lots are suitably restricted for the enjoyment of homeowners. In other words, no Jews. And that was how Griffin's Biscayne Park estates started. People didn't like them. So what happened after that? Well, after that, and you know, we're going to get to North Miami. I don't want you to get uncomfortable. We're going to get there. Remember that what happened with us is that our original name was Arch Creek, not incorporated. It was Arch Creek. We understand that. But Arch Creek, remember, really began as a community with a group of people from Elmira, New York. And they were known as the Elmirans. And what did they do? Every winter, they would ship their furniture down to the FEC station at Arch Creek. They would unload, and that was where they would set up for the winter. And this went on for a number of years, really through 1926. Well, at this point, we now remember this is all tied in because it was the Moore Farms Company. So at this point, a fellow comes down from Dayton, Ohio, and this fellow is Lee Cooper. Now, Lee Cooper comes down, actually, he came down with another fellow. In 1917 or 18, he sent Fred Boyer down. He was a druggist in Dayton. Lee Cooper had a product called Tanlac. What's Tanlac? The best that we can figure out, and Ted and I have a lot of laughs about this because he likes to tell me that Lydia Pinkham's remedy was actually a good product, but it really was nothing more than a patent medicine. What was Tanlac? It was a patent it cured whatever ailed you. Didn't matter, tuberculosis, cancer, the common, it would cure you. It wouldn't cure anything. But he made a lot of money from it. So Lee Cooper comes down and he buys the property, which becomes El Portal. So now we've got all of that. I mentioned William Gleason. William Gleason came to Florida as a carpetbagger and a scallywag after the Civil War. Eventually he would become lieutenant governor, and he would move to a place called Biscayne. Biscayne, what's Biscayne? Ladies and gentlemen, Biscayne is today called Miami Shores. And he moved to Biscayne. In 1900, it's an amazing story, but in 1900, you have to understand that the state statutes at that time permitted a vote every 10 years as to where that county wanted its county seat. The county seat had been towards the Miami River, and in 1890 moved up to Juneau. But another vote was taken 10 years later, and the people in southern Dade County won. Now you say, but Seth, what do you mean Juneau, Dade County? Ladies and gentlemen, what I want you to understand is that until the state legislature would start dividing the counties, that when this county was created in January of 1836, following the massacre of the cavalry troop of Major Francis Langhorne Dade over in Bushnell, and the territorial legislature, not the state legislature, named this huge county Dade. What's this huge county? Well, they took half of Monroe County. Remember that Indian Key at one point was part of Dade County. They took half of Monroe County, which would be returned to Monroe County after the Civil War. They took half of Monroe County, took and extended one county all the way north to what is today called Stewart, and that entire area was Dade County. Remember, the first breakaway was Palm Beach County in 1909, Broward County in 1915, and then, of course, the county that Stewart is in, 1925. So today, we're still a huge county, over 2,200 square miles, but you can imagine the size of it at the time. So the Gleason, Mr. Gleason, William Gleason, and his family become enormous landowners. There's records of them owning land throughout the state. And what occurred was that they chose Biscayne as their homestead. Well, what then occurred was that in 1900, the vote was we're going to move the county seat back to back down south. So they have this vote, and they go up and get it. Seth, what do you mean they go up and get it? They took a barge, they went up the Florida Coastline Canal and Transportation Company waterway. You know it today as the Intercoastal Waterway. And these are the lands that that company, mostly owned by Mr. Flagler, owned all the way down to the very south tip of this state. So Hunt and Gleason decide that they're going to bring the county seat back. What do you mean bring the county? The county seat, ladies and gentlemen, was a small wooden building. And they brought that small wooden building by barge down the waterway, unloaded, and put it over somewhere east of today's Biscayne Boulevard. And here I am teaching at FIU when I was adjunct teaching history on the two campuses, and one of my students, a terrific young man who was part Seminole. And in those days, when I was teaching at that campus, I would park over here at the Biscayne Bay campus, take the bus over, and one day I'm on the bus and I see the young man walk by and I see him go out to the parking lot. And then I see him coming back and he's got a paper bag in his hand. And I'm not paying any attention until he jumps on the bus and he says, "Professor Bramson, for you." And he jumps off the bus. What do you mean for me? It's a paper bag. Yeah, except I open it. And what's in it, ladies and gentlemen? Oh, it's an old book. I don't collect old books until I open it. And ladies and gentlemen, this was the 1878 Dade County Revenue Collector's Book. The oldest piece of marked, now listen to the disclaimer words, please. The oldest piece of marked Dade County memorabilia known to exist. And if you want to see it, we'd be delighted to have you come and visit the Bramson Archive. We're right here in Miami Shores. So at any rate, Gleason and Hunt bring the one-room county courthouse back, and there it is in Biscayne. All right. So what occurs thereafter then becomes even more interesting, because what we know today as North Miami, remember that in February of 1926, we decided to call ourselves and incorporate as the town of Miami Shores. The only problem was that this great company, and our Biscayne Park sales map is right there. You can come up and look at it. The only thing I will ask is, as we say in Espanol, s'il vous plaît, no tocar. See, that makes me bilingual, right? But here is your Shoreland Company map. So if somebody wants to say, well, but Seth, Miami Shores, but here it is, North Miami. Remember that Ellen Spears Harris and her cousin from Tennessee, Hugh Anderson, were the people who bought the Collins Bridge, at the time the longest wooden bridge in the world, connecting what at the time was not yet Miami Beach, was Ocean Beach, with the mainland. They bought it, and then they converted it to the Venetian Causeway. And when they got finished with that, they then came up and from the Moors bought this enormous tract of land, everything shaded, which is not only today's Miami Shores, but much of North Miami. And so they begin to develop. Now, the one interesting part that I want to mention to you, which you may have heard about, they built the Venetian Causeway, but their plan was to build a mid-bay causeway going right up the middle of the bay. And they began filling an island. that island was going to be 600 acres. It was going to be the largest man-made island in Biscayne Bay at the time. And remember, though, you didn't have 79th Street Causeway, you didn't have a broad causeway, you had the County Causeway, today called the MacArthur, and you had the Venetian. Those were the islands. This was going to be 600 acres. Well, at that point, the city of Miami extends itself north up to 121st Street. What occurs then, of course, is that we have what I refer to, and when I teach the Florida history classes, my students have to know the 5 terrible events of 1926. The 2 most important years in Dade County history were 1896 and 19... Am I okay on time? I'm not... Oh, wonderful, okay. I don't want anybody to get bored. And so the 2 most important years were 1896 and 1926. We don't have to know the 5 terrible events. What we should know, though, is that those 5 terrible events were the harbinger or harbinger of the Great Depression that would begin 3 years later. Everything started to decline following the 5 terrible events, the last of which was the great and terrible September 17th and 18th, 1926 hurricane. All right, so what occurs is that at this point, Ellen Spears Harris and Hugh Anderson have great plans for the Shoreline Company and Miami Shores Island. Now, Miami Shores Island at the time was going to be reached by a great road which they were calling the Grand Concourse. Not the Miami Shores Grand Concourse of today, but the Grand Concourse which would leave the mainland at approximately 116th or 117th and come over to the island and then a bridge over to what would become Surfside. Now, I've had people say, oh, that's where the broad caught. No, it isn't. Ladies and gentlemen, as you drive across the broad causeway and you look to your right, you see an island with magnificent homes, don't you? But it's an odd-shaped island. And why is it odd-shaped? Because when the great and terrible bust hit following the boom, they had only filled 300 acres. It's the unfinished island today called Indian Creek Village. So now, the city of Miami, here it is, a depression. The city of Miami can no longer afford to provide garbage, police. They can't do anything north of 87th Street. So they give up all of the property north of 87th Street. And now what occurs, and many of us know the story, that at that point, and you know, I've got several different dates. Fortunately, I think I've got the correct date because it appears that in 1931, a state legislature who lived south of us in what today is called Miami Shores went to the state legislature and got a statute passed. And the statute was very simple. Ready? The town of Miami Shores is no longer in existence. Just like that, out of existence. And the new municipality, south of where the former municipality was, is going to be called the Village of Miami Shores. And in that statute, it outlaws the use of the name Town of Miami Shores in perpetuity. So the folks here in what had been Arch Creek, what had been Miami Shores, wake up one day and they don't exist anymore. Nice feeling, huh? And so it doesn't take long until they decide, and like I say, ordinarily I don't even use notes like this, but they decide that we've got to come up with a name, and so the name chosen was Town of North Miami. And that's how we come into existence after having been the town of Miami Shores. So that's why you sometimes see pieces that have been issued where it says Miami Shores have nothing to do with today's Miami Shores, because this was Miami Shores. Now, the interesting thing is when you talk about the different maps, that you'll notice when you get over to Biscayne Park that the Biscayne Park map shows that municipality going about 5 blocks north of 125th Street. It doesn't anymore. It's now all ours. But when it was originally incorporated, it was Biscayne Park. So what occurs thereafter is that we begin to grow. Now, why the term North Miami? Why did the folks in NMB choose the name North Miami Beach? Both for the same reason. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the name Miami had already become famous. And so both municipalities wanted to capitalize on the Miami name. Well, as the growth continues, the town of North Miami, which had been incorporated, Scott, 31 or 32? 32, thank you. And what occurs thereafter is that the growth continues, and on May 27th, 1953, the then town council passes a resolution approved by the state legislature, and on that day and date, we become the city of North Miami. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is an incredible story, but the story of one cannot be told without tying in the others. And we have to understand that. Now, when I speak again in September, yes, we'll get more into Interama. We'll talk about what happened. As it turns out, for some reason or another, and remember, I am the senior collector. I'm collecting, and you know, many people get older. They lose interest. They just kind of, let me tell you, folks, I'm as maniacal, hysterical, and fanatical about saving all this junk as I ever was. So I want you, in fact, oh my God, Jimena, Jimena, I need help. I need a fix. Sell me some memorabilia. So that's what happens. And it reached a point where Myrna said, you got to do something. And I took 2 storage spaces up here at North Miami Mini Storage, 2 10 by 15s. Now, anytime that you would like to come and see the Bramson archive, just call me. Because remember, it's a private museum. I may be giving a talk. I may be in my classes. So you do need to let me know that you want to come and visit with us. It'll be an honor, a delight, a pleasure, and a privilege. And ladies and gentlemen, you've been great. Thank you all so very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.